Hey, Islanders, real quick before we get started on everything, I wanted to say a quick announcement. If you listen to some of our previous episodes, I went over in the one with Emily Harmon Waterloo a few episodes ago, and we talked about the Christmas tree lighting at Camano Commons. Just a quick update on that. We will no longer be doing that Christmas tree lighting due to the latest orders from Inslee. So just wanted to throw that out there. We will still be doing donations to the Christmas house if anyone is interested in doing so. I will leave a link for that in our episode show notes for this episode. But basically, it's on the Stand with Camano Food Bank website, and you just comment in there that this is for the Christmas house. We will be doing a refund for the people that bought tickets already, unless they want us to donate those, and we will still continue to donate those. So anyways, just wanted to say that quick word before we get into the episode today. All right, guys, thanks. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 72 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the co-founder of Camano Cider. Please welcome Corey Haugen. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. On this episode, I speak to Corey Haugen, who is one of the co-founders of Camano Cider. And this is actually going to be part one of the episode. Since we went a little long, I wanted to break it into two episodes. And this was a really fun episode for me. One, to learn about cider in general. I didn't know a lot about the production of it and how it's done. But two, just learning more about the Camano Cider and it specifically. And we actually don't get into Camano Cider in this episode. So you hear a lot of his backstory, kind of where he started, what he started his career in, where that led him to, and actually the first cider company that he started, which he'll get into, and kind of what the story is with that one. And if you come back for part two next week, you're going to hear about the founding of Camano Cider, how it was founded differently, and what he's done to build that out. So I won't get too much into spoilers of the Camano Cider side. The only thing I will say in this episode is after speaking with Corey, I went to a restaurant for dinner back when we still could do that, and I got one of the Camano Ciders. I got the pub cider, and I don't know why I'd never tried Camano Cider. I've seen it on different menus in the area. I've tried a lot of different types of ciders, but I'd never actually tried Camano Cider. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get the pub cider. I'm going to get that with my lunch or dinner or whatever. I guess it was a lunch that I went to. And it was different than any cider I've ever had, and it was so good. I'm normally a beer drinker. I'm also learning to like wine. But normally like ciders, like I get like Angry Orchard or things like that, and they're not my favorite. Like I'll drink them here and there, but like by halfway through the bottle, I'm like, I really don't want to finish this. The pub cider from Camano Cider, it is a blend between like a beer and a cider. It is so good. It's not too sweet. It's a little bit more dry, but it's got the feel of kind of like a beer. And I just love it so much. So anyways, I had to give that little plug in there. Next week, like I said, you will get into the founding of Camano Cider and why the pub cider is so good and how he's designed all of his ciders. So anyways, excited to get that one to you next week. But of course, this week, we've got part one of Corey Haugen. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Corey Haugen. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today, I'm here with the co-founder of Camano Cider. Welcome to the podcast, Corey Haugen. Is it Haugen or Hogan?
Haugen.
Haugen. Okay, cool.
But I respond to anyone. I'm one of those. It's one of those names where I'm just used to multiple ways to pronounce it. But yeah, Haugen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Corey.
Not super exciting. I grew up in Mukilteo. And that's where my parents are from still. And I should just start with this. I live in Mill Creek.
Okay.
So I'm not technically like a Camano Island resident, but I will make up for that in other various ways. But yeah, I live in Mill Creek, wife and 3 girls, so
Nice.
Very, very busy.
Yes.
Especially now with working from home and getting them to school and then their ages are 6, 4, and 2, so it's
Okay.
just like
Yes, they're all
in the
crammed
thick,
together.
Yeah, it's like it's fun, but it's at the same time we're tired a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
We have 4 kids we have 4 kids, twin girls who are 9, then a 7-year-old, and then a 4-year-old son.
yeah.
So it's just
So
you're
you're
always
right there.
tired.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But it's you kind of just roll with the punches and make the best of it, and like I said, we come up here all the time. I bring the girls up, they run around, and they love coming up here, and so part of Camano Cider is also having time to get out and just do other things instead of just being stuck in the house all the time.
Right.
So
Right. All right. So you grew up in Mukilteo then. Is that where you grew up, like, through high school and everything then?
Yep.
Okay.
For pretty much my entire life, yeah. I've been, I went to Kamiak High School, and then I escaped Washington and I went to the University of Oregon.
Okay.
So I was there for a little over 4 years, and then quickly wanted to come back. It was nice. It was nice to be away, like a short distance, but still be able to like come home in a weekend if I needed to.
Yeah.
And Eugene was great. It was a fun college town, but by the end of it, I was ready to come back home.
Yeah.
And I really didn't see myself going anywhere else. And I met my wife on my last couple quarters there, so that was another reason to come home. And so, and we've been we're living in Queen Anne for a little bit, and then we've been in Mill Creek ever since.
Okay.
So that's just kind of, that's really it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what drew you to Oregon to go to college there?
So I wanted to get away, and my dad went to UW, and I don't know, I guess I didn't even apply to UW, and so he was really struggling to write those checks to pay for University of Oregon.
You could have gone to Wazoo. That would have really been.
Yeah, well, I didn't do that, so at least I had that for him. But I went down there, and their sports marketing in their business school really attracted me.
Okay.
And they have this great business school, and so I started obviously working my credits and my classes for the business school. And once I got into it, I actually wasn't that interested. Like, it just didn't do anything for me. And so about halfway through college, I got into the advertising school, which is actually in the journalism school.
Okay.
So, which is really, it's kind of interesting whenever I bring that up. So I have a journalism degree, but with a focus in advertising.
Okay.
And then I have a business minor too, but just to kind of finish those credits up. But advertising was my big focus. It was kind of, once I started taking those classes, I just ran with it.
Yeah.
And because I really liked the marketing side, but then advertising sort of added this other element to it that made it more exciting and interesting, particularly with like the strategy portion and the creative side.
Yeah.
So finished that up, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work at ad agencies. I wanted to do that, like, cranking on different clients all the time, coming up with new ideas for them.
So let me jump in real quick.
Yeah.
How would you describe the difference between marketing and advertising then?
Oh, man. That's a good question. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference now. I think back in school, that's that was kind of interesting how they were very defined. Like marketing was part of the business school, and I don't know. I think I look at it as like the basic definition of marketing, and then advertising was more of that, like you working in an ad agency and coming up with pitches and new ideas for different brands and businesses.
Yeah.
And marketing, I think, was more of that just general understanding of how to market products and things within the business realm of things.
Right.
And I know that's still a generalization, but I mean, that's really what it felt like.
Yeah.
Now I've strayed, and we can kind of jump through the timeline, but I've strayed so far from both of those things.
Yeah.
And what you realize is, like, as you build your career, it just like you can't really define you just take all of that and you mold it all together, and then it becomes this like soup of different pieces of these industries, or these I don't know, like the professions, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I am. I'm like a weird grab bag of everything. So
well, you kind of have to be an entrepreneur of sorts. So okay, so then you graduated with journalism with focus in advertising, and then where'd you go from there then?
So came back home and obviously had to hit the ground running. So it was like I did the grind, like getting in ad agencies. So my first agency I worked for was this tiny agency called Square Tomato, and we were like in the heart of downtown Seattle. There was, I think, like 5 or 6 people that worked there. It was really cool. I mean, it like embodied that like agency feel.
Yeah.
I wasn't getting paid, and it was just kind of like that grunt work. But that's how a lot of people, everybody who graduated that I knew, I mean, that's how you started.
Yeah.
You did the dirty work, and then hopefully you built up a solid resume so that like another agency or someone looks at you and says, oh, okay, we'll actually give you money for these things you do.
Wow.
And I mean, that's just, I don't know if it was like that anymore, but because my second internship, I worked for an agency called Copacino Fujikato, and they're a pretty well-known agency around here. They do all the Mariners ads.
Okay.
And REI. So they had a lot of really great big accounts. And I remember they had this more professional feel. Like I actually had to wear like a button-up and nice pants. But I was actually getting paid. So that was...
This is a good thing.
That was really exciting. But I was still, I mean, talk about... I mean, I made the coffee in the morning. I made the little snack like presentations for when clients would come in. I answered the phones, and so I wasn't still doing like actual advertising work. I was like, there were moments in both agencies where I got to actually think of like solve problems and help like certain teams out.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was mostly like the guy filling the water and filling the coffee in the morning, and that was really hard for me to it was hard for me to do, because I can say this now. I mean, I was very stubborn when it came to that stuff. Like I wanted to, like when I saw like the guys who were like strategists,
yeah,
I wanted to like be in the room doing that with them,
yeah,
even though I had like no experience whatsoever. But that's where I wanted to see myself at that same level.
Yep.
And it took me a while to realize that I have to create the path to get to that, to where like I actually am at that same level, and realize that all this grunt work and everything that I do is I'm doing it for a reason, to have like to some end goal.
Yeah.
But even now I get frustrated. I mean, I always it's a competitiveness. It's I don't even know what you call it, but it's just kind of this thing that I have where like I'm never like satisfied, and then I always see somebody, like, put it in the context of like a cidery, right?
Yeah.
So and we can get into like, and this will make more sense when I describe our setup, but like when I look at these other cideries that have the big fancy tasting room and the big equipment, it's like, well, I should have that too. I mean, I should be doing that, and on that same level. And so I think it is like I'm competitive.
Yeah.
But I also, I mean, I know and think that I can do just as good of a job if I had the same setup.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, like, a lot of that, like, a lot of failure came with that too, like, especially in the ad agency world. And I had a lot of, like, reality checks, and I had a lot of good mentors that were very honest with me and just kind of laid things out and was like, yeah, no, you're not, like, ready for this. And, or, you know, I would do something and realize, I was going to swear. Can we...
We usually don't swear.
Okay. Oh crap. Like I'm not as, maybe I don't know everything, or maybe I don't know enough to really accomplish those things. I mean, there's so many, like, especially in the ad agency world. I mean, it's cutthroat.
Yeah.
And like so after the internship, I got a job at what was called Zaz, and it was like one of the coolest agencies. Like they had a full bar in their agency. We had annual flip cup tournaments, and they had like crazy cool clients like Audi, Coca-Cola. I mean, I worked on Smart Water, like all these like top tier brands.
Yeah.
I was working on them, like, and I actually had. I was like a junior strategist role.
Okay.
And so I felt like I finally got into that lane of where I wanted to be. And I had, at the time, I had my boss, I had these amazing mentors and managers and people really teaching me the ropes. And I was learning a lot, but also realizing, like, you know, where I was in my place.
Yeah.
I will say, like, I think a lot of the flashy things, like the bar and the parties and all that stuff, I think that being that young, it distracts you.
Yeah.
And you kind of gravitate towards that, like, oh, I work at this place and we're fun and we have dogs and stuff, and but it takes away your focus from, like, actually being successful and building your career. And it took me a while to realize that. But luckily, for at least the beginning of it, I had these really great bosses and managers and insanely smart people when it came to strategy and working on pitches for clients. And I mean, I had I pitched ideas to Coca-Cola, which was crazy, to like stand up there in front of like these executives and pitch these ideas. And that, I mean, looking back on it, it's like those are steps that made me more comfortable to the things I do now.
Yeah.
You know, and then so fast forward a little bit, in the same job, I got put under this other person that we just did not mesh well, and it was rough. Like, I don't think that person ever managed somebody young and still like greenhorn-ish, you know. So he didn't know what to do with me. Also, I'm insanely stubborn, and so I don't like people to tell me what to do. So that wasn't a good combination, and that immediately started spiraling. In not a positive way.
Oh, no.
But things like where I couldn't leave work until he said I could. And I'm not going to name names, but it was crazy. And I mean, and also the advertising mentality is like, you're not doing your job or doing really well unless you're working late hours in the middle of, and you know, you're all in a room working on a pitch deck at night, and like that's like supposedly the cool thing, and maybe it is for some people, but I quickly realized, yeah, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to wake up, come to work, do a really good job, but then go home and actually enjoy my life.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it was bittersweet because I was working with these really smart people and working on these really cool projects. And then I got put under this one person that made me not really want to do or be a part of the industry anymore. And I have a good segue into this. So around that time, my wife and I, we were living in our little apartment in Queen Anne, and so I got let go, and like totally caught me off guard.
Wow.
And really no reason. I didn't really get a reason. First of all, I was getting paid like crap. Looking back on it, like, holy crap.
You're working 12-hour plus
I
days.
was working so much. And also I could see like what they were charging clients for my work. And then what I was actually getting paid of that. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I didn't even, like, luckily my wife had a really good job, because I wasn't making hardly anything. And
well, and you guys are living in Queen Anne, you said, which is not a cheap place.
No, well, and we got lucky. We were at like right off the main Ave at the top of the hill.
Okay.
And top floor of this like 3-floor, and we had this really cool characteristic like apartment, and we got lucky on the rent because at the same time there was other places that were like way more for way smaller. So it was like this couple that owned the building, and they weren't really into like the rent hikes and stuff. And so we actually had a really cool experience.
Nice.
And I hated leaving it, but yeah, like I was getting paid like crap. And so it makes you like and I don't know if it's this way anymore, but and not every agency is like this. So I don't want to like put a stigma or stereotype like this is how ad agencies are like, but most of them like are. And I mean, I'll be honest, like I wasn't cut out for like that type of style of work. Like even though I loved advertising, I loved strategy and planning and researching and coming up with insights, I didn't really fit in with that culture and that style.
Right.
And obviously my manager didn't think so either. So he made it an easy decision for me. It sucked. It was the first time, my first time ever getting let go, and I didn't know what to do. But around that same time, I had started messing around with like making cider in the apartment.
Okay.
And that came from I hadn't, and it's been a while, so I don't remember when this exactly happened, but we were still living in an apartment, and I was looking for something to do, and I didn't want to brew beer because it was like everybody makes beer. And I originally wanted to make wine, but I found out that's not really easy to do in an apartment. And also I didn't have the patience for like aging the wine and all that stuff. And my dad sent me this article about hard cider, and this was back in like 2011. So it was like this little snippet in some business article about how hard cider was starting to like have interest. And I was like, okay, well, my parents used to have a place in Big Lake in Mount Vernon. And so driving up, we would always pass this place off of I-5. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like a big cider barn.
Okay.
And you can go get cider. Yep. Yeah, so Cedardale Orchards. Yeah. And I was like, well, I have great access to great cider, so why not try that? So it was like this weird combination of, while I was getting interested in cider, I also had this, I'm going to kind of go all over the place because it really is like, it's just like all these weird combinations of things now that I think about it. But upon my boredom too, I also started a wine blog where I would buy wine based off of the label. Okay. And then I would drink it and I would write reviews after I've had like several glasses. So it wasn't meant to be like really profound or like professional. it was probably like the most like just unprofessional wine blog ever. But I like took the I had pictures of like the labels and I wrote like my little like ratings of what I thought of them. And the cool thing was I found a lot of really good wines. And I always try to get like cheap wines, so under $15.
Nice.
And it actually, I found a lot of great wines based off of just the label, and I was really infatuated by that, and that comes from like my design and marketing background. I like cool labels and things like that. And so anyway, so I had this wine blog that turned into a cider blog. So I wanted to start understanding the industry and talking to people who are already starting to build cider businesses in the midst of just this like whiff of the industry picking up. And so through that, I have to, this being my first podcast, I have to call out Dave Whitewood and Reverend Nat from Reverend Nat Hard Cider. So Whitewood, Dave is from Whitewood. Sorry, David White. He has Whitewood Cider in Olympia.
Okay.
And he was kind of he had his own cider blog, and he was like, I reached out to him, and his blog was like where everybody would go to learn about cider before cider was even cool.
Okay.
And so I got in touch with him, and luckily these people were nice enough to let some random person ask a bunch of questions, and that's how I learned how to make good cider.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't make good cider in the beginning, but I at least understood the fundamentals, and I bought the right books. And I mean, Dave was amazing at giving me information, and just I would email him and he would get back to me, you know. And then I got in touch with Nat. And I remember the first time I met him was he was doing like his first Washington tasting down in Ballard. So I got to go, and it was funny. So the site was called Cider Times, and which is just it's so cliche, like Cider Times, like trying to be like an old newspaper. Mm-hmm. It actually, the site still is running today. Like some guy bought it, and he still like updates and posts about things, which is really cool. But it was funny because I went down there to Nat's tasting, and he was like, "Oh, you're the Cider Times guy," and so I got to become really good friends with him, and he was probably one of the main reasons why I could even do what I'm doing today.
Okay.
So, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but basically, so Nat and Dave, they were just, these guys are still, like, if you ever get your hands on Whitewood cider, or if you've ever had Reverend Nat's, I mean, they're like the staple. And Nat, I think he's like one of the biggest producers in Oregon to this day. And Dave at Whitewood, he's got this great little tasting room in Olympia, and he really tries to source from just that local area.
Okay.
And his cider is like, it's phenomenal.
Nice.
So these guys, I mean, they've been great, and I think that shows like that also, like that openness is something I try to do too to this day, because if they had not been so inviting and willing to share their knowledge, I mean, I probably wouldn't be doing this now, or I don't know. But really, I have to like obviously give a shout out to them, because they're amazing, and they were super helpful. And so I started that. Anyway, started making my hard cider in the apartment, and like I said, made some not great stuff, like really high alcohol, really dry, you know. But hey, it was like that's what I love so much, is the ability. And this, I think, comes back to my reason why I wanted to be in advertising and all the things I want to do, is because I love the idea of making something and seeing it and putting it out there for other people to enjoy or react to it.
Yeah.
And that's why advertising was so cool, because you take your ideas, you give them to these people, and then they get created.
Yeah.
And you get to see it out there. And so cider was kind of this thing that was mine, and even though looking back, I don't know how anybody drank it, but we did, and it was just cool to like I'd have my friends over and we would just like pour a growler of my cider, and I played around with so many different things from the beginning. I wanted to like test, like see what I could do with cider.
Yeah.
And keep in mind this time, like cider, like in the bars and stuff, was like not cider at all. I mean, it was like concentrate stuff, and really for when people would go to the bar, and if you didn't like beer, you would have like this cider for you to drink. So that's kind of where my passion started. So it was kind of this weird time of like getting interested in making cider, and then the kind of that, we'll call it a nudge of not working anymore.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to say, okay, well, what could we do here? So this is kind of the beginning of Grizzly Cider.
Okay.
So through one of my longtime friends, she married her husband at the time. He had a background in alcohol sales and things like that. So it was kind of this like, well, I'm making cider. You understand the industry. Let's see what we can do. And so we basically dove into it. So about the time Grizzly started, we had moved to Mill Creek, and I had figured out my recipes, or at least the main ones I wanted to do. And one of those being, I really liked putting hops in cider.
Okay.
So the other thing that was really cool about cider is the way I describe it is like it's this like kind of in between of wine making and beer making.
Okay.
So the process is more like making wine, obviously, because you're fermenting fruit, but you can do things to it like dry hopping, and I mean, I don't know, I would botch like different beer terms, but to me it's like kind of in the middle. And so I would try to like get beer like characteristics into my cider.
Okay.
Because I wanted it to taste more like a beer when you were drinking it.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, like back then, no one knew what like cider should be. It's not like an IPA or different beer styles.
Yeah.
Cider was like the Wild West, because at that time, what cider was like a sweet apple concentration carbonated alcoholic beverage.
Okay.
That's what cider was in the bars. So while we were trying to figure out our own take, all these other cideries were trying to do the same thing. And I will say, like, Whitewood Cider and Reverend Nat's, they had a much more understanding of the history of what cider should be, and traditional cider apples, and the different styles that were actually existed back then.
Yeah.
With that said, like Nat is known for like going crazy on just whatever he could create a cider. I mean, he did it.
Yeah.
And he made, I think one of his first ones was like a hopricot, and it's a hopped apricot cider, and it was delicious. And so I really kind of gravitated towards that ability to put whatever you wanted into a cider and see what happens to it. So that's the other portion of why cider was so cool, is you could kind of experiment and play around with different flavors and varieties. So we were cranking it. We were trying to figure out our recipes. I had a hop cider. I had this other cider where I put like molasses and hops in it. So the molasses gave it kind of this like dark color and more of a body. And it really was. It had more of like a body, like a beer, and then I had kind of like a regular cider, and so those were like the main three. So me and my business partner at the time, we found a space in Woodinville, and that's where we started Grizzly Ciderworks. We were the first cidery in Woodinville, We were producing within a winery because basically it was a winery license. So that allowed us to kind of jump in, and we were lucky because this winery had this huge space, and they really didn't need it all. So they let us come in and use the equipment.
Nice.
And we just paid them, which was great for them because it was one of the big, in kind of the warehouse district in Woodinville.
Yep.
So that's where we started. We had our own 10-barrel bright tank, and then we had the big IBCs for fermenting. And I mean, it's kind of crazy looking back on it. Each batch I did was like, I mean, those IBCs are like 280 gallons. So I went from brewing these little 5-gallon batches in my apartment to brewing these huge quantities, which is just like, I don't know how I wasn't more stressed out back then. Luckily, I have a really good friend who is a farmer out in Yakima, and he has a incredible biology background, so he understood the ins and outs of like the science behind fermentation and things like that. So whenever I thought I screwed up, I would call him, and I still do to this day. I call him and I'm like, did I do something wrong? Or so he's always my gut check, and which I think honestly has saved me back in the beginning because those batches are crazy. And I mean, if anything goes wrong, you lose 280 gallons.
Yeah.
And you multiply that by 280 gallons. I think we're paying like $4 a gallon. So it's a lot of money we're investing in growing this cider business. And so at the time, so we did kegs, and so we were doing draft only.
Okay.
And so we went around to these bars and tried to pitch our cider, which again, these bars had one tap for a cider, which was not cider. And we went in here with our cider with like hop cider and this one that tasted more like beer. And these bartenders, I mean, the managers, they looked at me and are like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to take off this one cider that sells really well because it's like probably crazy cheap and his margins are amazing.
Right.
For like this. And I mean, I will say it was a big mix of like hits and misses.
Yeah.
We found some great places that were open to giving us a shot, and it really helped. Actually, there's a place down the street from my house called Elliott Bay Pizza, and he was like totally open to.
Nice.
I mean, he had like his beer selection on tap is like amazing. So he was totally open to putting me on tap, and it was great. That was our exposure, and so I mean, I'll kind of fast forward through Grizzly, but I did that full time for a whole year.
Okay.
And then I had my daughter, and then reality kicked in, and I was like, all right, I need to get a real job. I got a mortgage, all this stuff. So we had to figure out what were we going to do. I wanted to create our own tap room in Woodinville. I wanted to build something there. And my partner didn't. At the time, we were talking to this company out in Walla Walla that does co-packing. So they make their own cider. They also make and package cider for other cideries that don't have like the space or like the capacity to do that or the equipment. Okay. So it actually, I mean, at the time it was like a great deal. They made the cider. We got bottles. We had a packaged product. They were able. All we had to do was basically sell it, and they would meet that demand. They would just crank it out. So that was kind of the next phase of Grizzly. The problem with that is basically it removed me because I didn't make the cider anymore.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't like driving out to Walla Walla all the time and like doing it. They had their own guys. They did their thing, and that's kind of what it became. So on the plus side, Grizzly for over the next couple of years, we had Grizzly all over. We were in 4 or 5 states.
Wow.
I had the Central Market by my house had Grizzly cider. I mean, it was really cool to see like my bottle, the cider bottles in stores. And, and it did fairly well. Our margins were just awful because we were co-packing, so we had these paper thin margins, and that forced an even more of an emphasis on sales, which is what my partner did. So over time, I got more and more phased out of the business.
Okay.
I also made the mistake of letting his friend be a part of it. So it was kind of like, I don't know, like with businesses, it's like you have voting and all that crap. So like basically they just kind of said, well, we're going to do things this way. This is our operating agreement, blah, blah, blah. And I just had to go with it. And it basically just sucked all the passion and fun out of making cider.
Yeah.
So long story short, we had a big falling out, big surprise. There wasn't anywhere else to take it. We were trying to get them to buy Grizzly, and it was a mess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
The whole thing was, and there was other things that happened that just made it even more difficult. And Grizzly just kind of came to a halt, and it's like didn't exist. And going through that, all the other stuff with like having a business partner that where you were sending the conversations you were having with that person were not very good and nice conversations. Like you had in the beginning, you had this great friendship, and you're like, everything's great. We're going to build this business together, and we're going to be successful. To I don't ever want to talk to you again unless there's a lawyer in the room. Right. I mean, that's a big shift.
That's a big change.
And tying that to something that I loved a lot, it was devastating. I mean, I remember like just driving in the car with my wife, and just kind of like it just all hit me like like this just didn't go the way I wanted it to. Everything fell apart. Like I'm being accused of things, like it's like my fault, blah blah blah. Like it was a mess, and I basically I didn't want to do cider anymore. I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want the industry anymore. I was like, screw this, screw all you people, and I just kind of went back to
what you knew,
what I knew, and working and providing for my family. And
well, a big thank you to Corey Haugen for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. Remember to come back next week for part 2 of this podcast. And if you want more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/EP72. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP72. Thanks for coming, and see you next time.